Welcome to another edition of Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer, Professor of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I serve as the host of the program. With me today are two of our regular cast members, Viewmeisters as we used to be called. On my right is Denise Keel. Denise is a professor in the Political Science Department at Western Michigan University. She also works at the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability, and she serves as the chair of the WMU Climate Change Working Group. On my left is Don Cooney, who's a professor over in the School of Social Work at Western. Don also serves as a city commissioner here in Kalamazoo. Well, it's been about a month since we've been able to get together.
Right.
And the last time that we were here, we were talking about the Mueller report and the impeachment debate. And we kind of weighed in on what we thought about that particular issue. Since then, I guess the main thing to report is that Mueller himself made a appearance.
Right.
He actually came out of his hole, saw a shadow, and went back in for 6 more years, I guess. But he came out and made an oral statement and basically said, read the report.
That's right.
Just read the report. Of course, Americans don't read.
No.
Justin Amash, the Republican congressman from here in West Michigan, did read the report and bravely came out and said Donald Trump should be impeached. The lone Republican to so far call for that.
That's right.
So very brave, courageous stand on his part. He hasn't been able to sway anybody else in his party. The Democrats are still holding back. Nancy Pelosi just doesn't want to go there for one reason or another. But the clamor, I think, for calling for an impeachment inquiry continues to grow. Almost all the major presidential candidates on the Democratic side have issued that call. And with each passing day, Trump signals his intent to violate still another law. And so I think the clamor grows ever stronger. Don, you were one that was a little reluctant to go there. Have you changed your mind at all?
Yes, I have. Because I think his continued arrogance and refusal to let people testify before Congress, the complete contempt of that, and his idea that he's above the law, and the actions of Barr, which just reinforced his position. I really think that now it is appropriate to go to the impeachment.
All right.
That was a conversion.
It was fun to battle last time, but I'm glad to hear you say that. One quick thing about Amash that I think is really interesting. So the last poll said 3% of the American public has read the Mueller report. There are many Republicans being interviewed who have not even read it, and this to me highlights Barr and that role, right? To go back to that, being able to hold the report out, not let people see it, and for the administration to get the first crack at telling the American public what was in there.
Right.
Because there was a woman who got interviewed after Justin Amash. He held a town hall. He's the Battle Creek, Grand Rapids area here in Michigan. Held a town hall, and it was not well received news because he's a Republican and it's a conservative district. And they interviewed a woman after that has been making all the headlines. She said, well, that's the first time I've ever heard that report said that the president was not exonerated. And I thought,
she said, I watch conservative news.
That's right. I mostly watch conservative Fox News, and I like my congressperson, and and he's well known for being a libertarian actually and constitutional. But this is the first time I've ever heard this. And so not just courage from Justin Amash, but this idea that Barr and the administration got to set the tone and tell those Americans who will always believe whatever Trump says, that this is what it is, they still believe that. So the Democrats have a huge hurdle here. If you want to get the story out of why impeachment is necessary, right? And that story we know is blocked because of the month and a half that Barr and the administration had to tell their lies, basically. So now you need to tell the story to start impeachment, but what can the president do? He can stop all of these witnesses, continue to obstruct justice by saying, don't testify, we won't let this go before. So how does Nancy Pelosi, how does Congress tell their story to even get the public on board with the idea of impeachment? And my take on this is, Trump is the master of reality TV. Without a star witness at the investigative hearings to get the poll. You're never going to tell the story that gets the polling numbers of the American public up there. So even more now, I'm convinced you have to go to impeachment so that you have the right to call those witnesses. I mean, it's great to hear from John Dean from Watergate, but that's not who we need to hear from. That's not who the American public needs to hear from on this. So I'm even more convinced now after this last month.
So you think with impeachment, they would have a stronger legal right to get these people to testify?
Absolutely.
And that's probably the only way they would
That's the only way they're going to get them. And again, if this is going to be a TV reality contest, Trump will win that unless we go all the way.
Yeah, I think one of the key things here would be that Bob Mueller would have to come and testify.
Yeah.
And he's very reluctant. He's the Eagle Scout. He's the Marine. He's the straight shooter. He's a play by the rules kind of guy.
Yes.
And an institutional conservative. We used that term before to characterize him, and he is. So he's very much, play it straight, play it by the book, follow the law. And of course, there's Trump, who's the bully who breaks all the laws and breaks all the norms and runs rings around Mueller because Mueller's plotting ahead, trying to do the right thing, and Trump could care less about the right thing and the rules and the norms, and so just shreds everything.
That's right.
And at the same time dominates the TV waves, right?
That's exactly right.
By being the bad boy, by being the bully, by having the large megaphone or the largest thumbs on his Twitter account. He dominates the news, and there's Mueller, you read my report. Well, who's going to read his report, right? Not many people. So we need him to come and testify. I mean, he tried at that, when he made that appearance, he basically said, look, if I could have exonerated the president, I would have, but I didn't. So even that sort of convoluted way to say, I found evidence of crimes, right? I detailed the evidence of crimes in my report. Read my report. It lays out in great detail the obstruction of justice, all the contacts that this administration had with the Russians, and willingly accepted. I couldn't charge because of certain institutional barriers that I, as an institutional conservative, were not willing to overcome or go beyond. So again, I'm playing by the rules. And the Trump people and the conservative media will never play by the rules, and so they win the day.
That's right, which is why Congress has to do their job. I mean, that's Mueller's main message. Right? As a professor, I'm sure we sympathize, right? When I was watching Mueller, I thought it was sort of like, did y'all not read the chapter before class? Like, do the read. Okay, you didn't do the reading, so now I'm going to have to do a little bit more work here, right? To
Anybody
get us
in
all
class read the assignment? No.
What assignment?
Exactly. But Congress needs to do their job, and their job is impeachment. And I think he was also still clearly saying why I am following the rules to keep this process above board so that it doesn't, at least in historical lens, look like it was a smear campaign or only for political reasons, right? I mean, he's doing that for a very particular reason, and it's up to Congress now.
Right. So it's time.
And that's what he was saying, but he says it in such a convoluted, legalistic, conservative way that it doesn't come across very well, right? I mean, he's basically saying, Congress, it's your job to impeach this guy. Here's the evidence. Read the evidence. Do your job. Impeach. That's what he's saying without coming out and saying it. Unless he comes out and says it that directly and that boldly with some kind of flair and flourish in front of TV
Which
cameras.
he won't do.
Which he won't do.
So the late night comics always have their pulse on these things, and one of them said, well, this is like, I wonder what Bob Mueller was like when he got married, and instead of I do, he must have said, well, I don't not take you to be. I thought that was one of the best jokes of the last. Because when the public is left, well, wait a minute, does he or doesn't he? What's going on here, right? So,
And by focusing on the Mueller report, we're actually looking only at a couple of areas that could be grounds for impeachment, right?
Yes.
I mean, we're looking at what kind of contacts the Trump campaign had with foreign entities. And Trump came out the other day and said he'd accept them again. That the FBI is wrong to say that the federal law says I can't do that. Well, the federal law is so clear and clear as a bell that you can't do that. But he says, no, the FBI is wrong.
Amazing.
So that's one area.
The arrogance,
The arrogance is just incredible. And then the second area, of course, is the obstruction of justice. And there's the strongest case laid out in the Mueller report. But
Right.
we've got, his violations of the Emoluments Clause, and
Yes.
there really are a variety of other things.
Yeah.
Well, recently, there have been some calls to initiate impeachment proceedings
Yeah.
based on another crime, high
Yeah.
crime and misdemeanor, that this administration has engaged in, and that has to do with their inability or their lack of effort to do anything about the climate crisis.
That's right.
Their basically constant war on science that they are waging, and very specifically their destruction of the Environmental Protection Agency, the
Yes.
rollback of the role that that particular agency plays. And I wanted to read one of the calls that came. George Ochensky, journalist, said, "There's a rising tide calling for the impeachment of this mad ruler. And while the focus is on his business and political corruption, perhaps the best reason to impeach Trump is for his high crimes against the planet itself. And if it takes impeachment to stop his climate policy insanity, it can't come soon enough." And another columnist, Basav Sen, said, "Governments that respect democracy, transparency, and truth don't systematically obstruct scientific research and harass scientists, nor do they resort to crude propagandistic terms like freedom gas
Oh gosh. Yeah.
to mask the truth about their agenda. This is obstruction and collusion of the worst and highest order. If the comparatively venal case of Russiagate is grounds for impeachment, why isn't this?" So what do you guys
Good.
think?
Powerful, powerful, and yeah, I mean, and I think the recent statement by the former EPA directors, there were 4 of them, and 3 of them were from a Republican administration, calling out about
Yes.
the complete disregard of science and the failure of the Environmental Protection Agency to do its job. I think that's very, very powerful.
That's right. And we, much like the obstruction case, there is clear and compelling evidence. It is
Right.
on the record over and over again of administrative Trump instructions
Yeah.
to not model the worst case climate scenarios anymore, right? To leave out certain
Right.
chunks of data. Another important one is to only model up to 2040 because we know that 2050 is
That's
when
when it all happens.
right? And so replacing scientific review panels with industry gurus, right? I mean, over and over again, there are actual executive orders signed by President Trump that do exactly these things that are absolutely interfering and obstructing the science. And I think that's why you saw these former EPA administrators from different administrations. I mean, all the way back to Reagan's
Right.
EPA administrator. Riley was there, H and W Bush's, as well as Obama's. All saying
Christine Todd Whitman,
Whitman,
who was
thank
under
you.
George W. Bush.
Yeah, all saying, look, this is not, what the EPA is supposed to be about. This is about protecting public health and the environment, and the total disregard of science is something that all of them can get together and say, we at least need a baseline of information here. The list goes on and on.
And people will die because
That's
Right.
true.
Exactly.
I mean, we have to be very blunt about this. People
That's
will
right.
die. People will get diseases. People will be,
That's
their
right.
lives will be disrupted because the federal government is refusing to enforce the laws
That's right.
that are on the book concerning protecting people and protecting the environment.
That's right.
Right.
We have a new Union of Concerned Scientists report. I know, our audience was probably familiar. Australia just came out with a huge report. The oceans, even less
Right.
time than we thought. Those things are all happening faster. Yet here we are rolling back fuel economy standards.
Oh, right.
So friendly to industry that even the automakers, we're in Michigan, okay, right? Even the automakers said, well, we can do better than that. Like
Yeah.
they don't.
Yeah.
Like this is so far on the non-science and on just laissez-faire opening it up again. It's really unbelievable. And maybe my least favorite is the idea that natural gas in all of these documents is now called freedom gas. So we're not even going to use the correct technical term for a substance anymore, right? We're going to call it, it's propaganda.
It is propaganda, the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Freedom gas. What?
And the
I
fact
don't even
that-
know what to say to that.
I mean, the scientific evidence is so clear and compelling,
Yeah.
and it just continues to accumulate. And of course, that Australian report was one of the most dire that
Right.
we've seen. It basically says, look, things might be much, much worse than
That's
we've
right.
even been led to believe, right? You know, if things break in a certain way, human civilization itself could
That's
be
right.
Right.
could be affected
Right.
by 2050.
That's right.
We, you know, I mean, this is a
Right.
crisis. You know, the
That's
house
right.
is on fire,
That's right.
and you know, how can we sleep when our beds are burning, right? And yet, not only does
Yeah.
the Trump administration want us to continue to sleep while the bed is burning, they want to deny that the bed is even on fire,
Yeah.
right?
That's
and they're
right.
hiring people to come in and tell you that your bed's not on fire.
Absolutely.
So keep,
Yeah.
keep lying
Right.
there and keep
Right.
slumbering through the fire because your bed really isn't on fire.
That's right.
And I mean, they've now set up this review panel, right?
Yes.
That's basically attempting to rebut
That's
the
right.
mountain of scientific evidence.
That's right.
And it's just such a sham.
Yes.
Because they can't do that in any, you know, no scientist could do that,
Right.
legitimate scientists, because the evidence is simply not there.
Oh, wow.
Right.
And so, again, this is just pure propaganda.
Sowing
Right.
doubt. That's their.
all they
That's what
need
they
to
want to
do.
do.
Yeah.
They can't.
Doubt is
Yeah.
our product.
Right.
Yeah, I do think so. So something that doesn't get as much attention. I do think one of the reasons why these former EPA administrators came out. So under the Obama administration in 2009, the Environmental Protection Agency does issue what's called an endangerment finding for greenhouse gases. Right. That's
Right.
what under Massachusetts EPA and other litigation kind of has to happen for under the Clean Air Act for any of these things under existing
To
legislation
allow to be able to regulate
to give them the
greenhouse
authority
gases as a pollutant.
to do that. And you know, the Trump administration knows that they'll get sued immediately if they try to walk back that, right? But so this endangerment finding exists, and so that means you have to do something, right? So one of the things that Obama had implemented right before the elections was the carbon pollution rule, right? So existing power plants were supposed to
Clean Power
reduce
Plan, they called
emissions.
it.
Thank you, by 30%. So that got all rescinded under Trump. And the Trump administration came out with a new rule that doesn't cut emissions, but if you remember George W.'s approach, this intensity. So how long you run the plant, we're going to measure those kinds of things and call that a carbon rule. It's got a great name as well, the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, ACE, right? So, but this is a very sneaky thing, actually, the way to think about this. So they know they can't walk back an endangerment finding, and the quickest way to sue the federal government is for non-action on an endangerment finding. So here's something they can say, oh, but we are doing something, right? See, look over here under this shell rock, we're doing something. And that's, I think, in part what really got these EPA administrators, you know, all of these things, and then this is the rule that you're going to put in place of
Yeah.
actual reductions in emissions. I think that really sent them over the edge. So I know it's kind of nuanced, but there's this long arc of this story here about what's happening.
It's not just that they're refusing to do their jobs. They're devious and coming up with all kinds of ways to make it appear that they're doing something
Exactly.
when they're not, and to thwart the legal and regulatory process.
That's right.
So it will be one thing if they just said, "Hey, we're not gonna enforce the law."
Exactly.
But then they come up with all these propagandistic and
That's right.
you know, distorting moves
Yeah.
Right.
that try to hide
That's right.
what they're obviously doing.
Right. So by doing that, for example, once they rescinded the Obama rules, about 100 different public nuisance suits got filed all over the country by mayors and cities and states saying, oh, see, government's not doing anything, and we know there's this endangerment. Just by doing this, even though it's useless action, that now negates all of those suits and says, well, no, that's the federal government. They are doing something, so now you got to take it up with them.
So
Right?
what did the
It's a big
endangerment
game.
statement say?
So in 2009, the first thing that the Environmental Protection Agency has to do in order to regulate a new air pollutant is say that this endangers public health, that there is ample evidence that greenhouse gases have a negative effect on public human health.
And just to one step back, you mentioned the EPA versus Massachusetts.
Yes.
So let's just reiterate what that was. That was a 2007 ruling by the Supreme Court,
Right.
which I think was unanimous or 7-2.
Oh no,
or
good old 5-4.
Was that a 5-4
Oh
decision?
yeah, it's
I
a
was
fun
thinking
world we live in.
I guess I was wishful thinking.
It's
that
very,
it was a
very,
stronger
very nice
ruling.
to think that, but
But nonetheless, what Massachusetts, EPA versus Massachusetts did, it basically, the Supreme Court basically said, yes, EPA, you do have
That's right.
the legal power to regulate greenhouse gases.
that's right.
You know, they were saying they didn't have the power to do it under
That's
the
right.
Bush
Right.
administration.
That's
Right.
right.
And the Supreme Court said, no, you do. You have that power under the Clean Air Act.
That's right.
So now get to work. Well,
Right.
the first step in getting to work
right.
is
Is
to
there an
issue the
endangerment?
endangerment finding.
That's right.
So once they've issued that finding, okay, now, yes, this is a danger. Now what are we going to do about it?
Right.
And so then,
Federal government now has a responsibility to act.
Okay.
And so, and now it's all about, well, what action is going to actually save us?
Right.
But doing these kinds of absurd things is enough to keep them sort of out of the courts and out of the limelight on some of that. So it's meant to deceive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, and if people are getting their news from sources that are, they can make a soundbite out
That's
of that,
right.
say, we're responding to that, here's what we're doing. We're
That's
taking
right.
and then it's over.
Right. You know, I mean, I think that Trump does think that he will still win on the environment with his base, you know, cleanest water ever, cleanest air ever. I mean, he's going out and saying things like this, right? That
cleanest climate. We have the cleanest
we have
climate.
the best climate, the best. Yeah, and,
my
it,
God.
it really could not be further from the truth. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it just feels like we're in Alice in Wonderland. doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Up is down, black is white.
Yes.
You know, a climate crisis is the
Yes.
cleanest climate ever. It's just
Yes.
like, and just the shameless lies,
Yes.
and distortions about the situation. And the base just eats it up.
Yep.
And they continue to support somebody who's recklessly endangering their lives.
That's right.
He's recklessly endangering the lives of their children and their grandchildren.
Which-
He's recklessly
yeah.
endangering human civilization itself, maybe
Yes,
by
yeah.
2050.
Yes.
This man is a direct threat. He's the, you know,
Yes.
Tom Engelhardt in one of his columns referred to him as the greatest criminal of all time.
Yes.
The greatest criminal of all time. He may kill human civilization.
Yeah.
I mean, not by himself. Of course, there's been, you know, there was plenty of problems before Trump
Right.
came along. But any momentum that the Obama administration, and again, they didn't do nearly enough.
No.
I mean, and I'm very critical of
Yep.
Barack Obama. You didn't think I was
Well,
critical enough,
you
but,
know.
but I am critical of Obama for not doing as enough as
Yeah.
was needed. But at least they started to do some things,
That's
and
right.
the Paris Agreement started us down that path.
That's right.
But now Trump has trying to withdraw us from Paris, killed the Clean Power Plan,
Yep.
and in every other possible way is trying to distort and
That's right.
use propaganda to block any kind of action from dealing with the climate crisis. And it is
That's
a
right.
crisis. We have to stop talking about climate change and talk about the climate crisis.
Emergency, crisis are the words that The Guardian and other folks are really trying to get out there
Right.
in the
And
rhetoric
yet
now.
this administration
Yeah.
refuses to do anything. There's one effort to try to
There's
get them
one
to do
court
something.
case, yes.
So you mentioned some of the other
Yeah.
suits that were filed, and
Right.
there's really a ton of climate litigation.
Yes, there is, yep.
In my forthcoming book, I try to review some of that litigation. One of the most important, though, is Giuliani
Yeah.
versus the United States.
Yeah.
And so this was a case that got started back in 2015. There were 21 children who filed suit against the federal government. Basically, they were claiming that their rights have been violated.
Right.
The government has violated its public trust obligations under the law, and that they made a couple of different arguments. One argument is that the government's not doing what it needs to do, right?
Right.
That it's not acting to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Right.
But they also
Yeah.
made a very strong argument that there's an affirmative action that the government is taking,
Correct.
and that is to create an energy system that promotes fossil fuels and promotes greenhouse gas emissions. And so that by their affirmative actions, their
correct.
positive actions in creating this energy system and enforcing or reinforcing this energy system, they're also contributing to the problem. Then they're not doing anything about the problem they're helping to create.
That's right.
There's another part of this. So
Yeah.
the Giuliani case has been tied up in the
Yeah.
courts for a long time.
Yes.
The Trump administration has filed appeal after appeal after appeal. One of those appeals is currently pending in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in Oregon. And so last week there was a hearing there. And Denise, I know you were following that hearing and watched the video from it, I believe.
Yeah.
And so what happened? And
So it's the most important probably little piece that we can move forward right now is to support these plaintiffs. If you're not online, and go online. All eyes on Juliana is the hashtag, because of exactly what you said and this history of this endangerment finding. And if the federal government does a few things, then they can't really be accused of inaction so much, which is the sort of traditional way to sue for harm. And what this suit does that is so interesting and wonderful about its argument is that, you're not doing stuff. But the heart of our argument is that you are actively pursuing strategies that do endanger my health by having oil and gas leases on public lands, by supporting federal grants for these LNG, the liquid freedom gas,
freedom gas.
tunnels,
Yes.
right?
Use the
That
right term.
These are, as Ron would know, knowingly criminal acts that are destroying these children's future, right? So it's not just that a lot of folks frame this as, oh, I have a right to a stable environment or a stable climate. Well, no, I have a right for you to not knowingly contribute to the destruction of my life, liberty, property, and pursuit of happiness. So it's a Fifth Amendment constitutional claim. And that was this whole hearing was about whether or not there is a constitutional claim here. And so, I can't wait to show this to my class because oral argument, you get like 15 minutes and then 5 minutes per question. They went over time and all of these things, and there were so many folks out there supporting that they had to move courthouses so they could fit all these people in. There were another 1,000 people in a park outside, and folks were watching it, streaming it online. We don't know the decision yet, right? Unfortunately, the courts work a little slow, so it's only been a week since this oral argument. And it's 3 Obama-appointed judges, so if we want to say the Ninth Circuit is liberal, that might be one argument here. But they really did do a lot of tough questions to both the government's narrow view of constitutional rights and the lawyer for the Children's Trust for Juliana. She's incredible, the way that she was answering the questions and trying to assert this constitutional right.
Julia Olson,
yes.
Is that her name, I believe?
Yes. And they got into this interesting thing I was talking with Don earlier about, well, aren't you asking us to do something really new and novel? And they are, but the lawyer doesn't want to say that, right? Because the courts operate on precedent and show me where this is in the law and help me find the law to apply to this, right? And so, she was bringing up basically every famous case you've ever heard of, Brown v. Board, and every other time we have found a constitutional right, for example, under discrimination or to bodily autonomy, right? All of the Roe v. Wade type cases, right? That there are these other violations of your constitutional rights that happen, and that this could be framed as one of them, just like things like bodily autonomy or discrimination, or like the civil rights movement, right? So, fascinating argument to say you are now knowingly contributing to my destruction and that violates my constitutional rights. And so the court's question really is, can this be considered a constitutional question? Is this something for the courts to decide, or are all of us poor people still stuck in the other quagmire litigation mess that I just tried to explain of the Clean Air Act and carbon rules, and is this really executive and Congress kind of stuff, right? So that their main question is this a constitutional right that we have a duty to protect? And it really is probably as big as Brown v. Board at this point.
So if what would be the favorable outcome? That the judges would say, you have a right?
That's right.
And then it would be brought to a trial?
That's right.
Yes, there was already a trial date set at one point.
Which is October, and it's already
October a year ago.
June.
Yeah.
And
So now, so then it's been thrown back to the circuit court.
That's right.
This is what's called an interlocutory
Yep.
appeal.
Look at you.
So, which is basically an appeal
Yeah.
before the trial court has actually made a decision, right?
It's a mess of, yeah.
It's
Well, because this is the way that any good lawyer, and you expect any administration to do, you pick apart a case and you say you don't have standing, you don't have this, and you pick out every little thing you can and drag it on as long as possible so that something will happen and your plaintiffs will give up. But I see no signs of that. I only see increasing support and public support, that folks are watching this case with that, and the judges were very aware of that, right? So, yeah, the best outcome would be that these judges decide there is at least grounds for this constitutional claim to proceed. We want to hear a full trial on
let's
this.
have a trial.
Yeah.
Let's have a trial.
Let's bring that evidence.
Wow.
That's really what would be the final decision here. Is
Absolutely.
okay, yes, you can go ahead and have your trial.
That's right.
Wow.
And then fight it out at trial.
That's right.
There would still be appeals following
it'll
the
go-
trial,
yes.
right? No matter which way.
No matter which ways it goes, this is going to go on.
It would still go back
a
to
little
the
bit.
Ninth Circuit Court again after the trial was over, and
Yes.
maybe even eventually the Supreme Court.
That's right.
Given the current constitution of the court,
That's
we wouldn't really even expect a positive outcome.
Maybe not.
No matter what at that court, but you never know.
That's right.
But the trial, I think, is important. Now, the trial court judge, the federal district court judge in Oregon, is Ann Aiken,
Yes.
is her name, and she had to rule on the motion to dismiss.
Right.
Right. So the Obama administration and the Trump administration came in and tried to file a motion to dismiss the case,
Right.
and they had support from industry groups that
Yes.
joined in on the lawsuit, at least initially. They've since withdrawn those industry groups. But
Yes.
so Judge Aiken had to consider, and so people should read this. This is one of the most astounding documents that I've ever read. This opinion, where she denies the motion to dismiss,
Yeah.
is just an incredible piece of legal
Yes.
reasoning. And it covers all the grounds that, she's clearly up to date on the scientific
That's right,
evidence
yeah.
and how the law should deal with the scientific evidence. So it's an
right.
incredible document, but basically she denied their motion to dismiss
Yeah, yeah.
and said, yes, this can go forward to a trial.
Yeah.
And so then the next step was to have the
That's
discovery
right.
phase and prepare for trial. And then all these
right.
interlocutory appeals started coming in.
That's
And
right.
they've lost a couple of
They
these
have-
appeals.
they
They lost
absolutely
two at the
have.
Ninth Circuit. They lost one at the Supreme Court even.
That's right.
And now they've thrown another Hail Mary pass.
That's-
And I can't even understand why the Ninth Circuit is considering this again, because this is like the third time. They haven't changed their arguments at all.
No.
Why are they letting them come back for a third time to try to make a Hail Mary pass?
I think because the argument always from the executive branch is this same, no, wait, we're working on a rule and all this is going to be moot because we're going to take this great action, which I just described to you that is actually no action. That's why the plaintiffs are so smart, because even if the federal government does take action, what they're also arguing is you're continuing to voluntarily, knowingly support other acts that
Right.
cause
Right.
destruction. So I don't care what else you do to say you're does that make so it's super smart, and in fact I'm really intrigued to see these lawyers are very smart. They're starting to play the same game that industry and the administration would play in these cases. So industry and the administrations would, we need to stay, we need to obey, we need more time so that we can go figure something out. And in the meantime, no action, right? And these lawyers are also now starting to play that game. And so they have another petition to the court that says, you know what, until you decide our case, there should be a stay on oil and gas extraction from public lands because you haven't yet decided whether that's a constitutional right. So
Right.
they're really starting to push
Wow.
the envelope and be very aggressive on those kinds of tactics. And I think it's a really, really smart way to play that litigation game. So
So what we would hope to have happen is that if they would prevail at trial, then Judge Aiken is going to have to basically come up with an order
A remedy.
to the federal government, a
Yes.
legal remedy. So the remedy would probably have several parts to it.
Yes.
One would be stop extracting these gases on federal land, stop promoting
Subsidies, for instance.
stop providing subsidies, stop doing the things that you're doing to promote the fossil fuel industry.
That's right.
Oh, and also, by the way, you need to come up with a plan
And
to
do
reduce
something.
carbon emissions, right? You've got to start.
Wow.
You've got to come up with a plan that will really do that.
That's right.
So it
That's
would be an
right.
incredible
Yes.
thing to see
Great victory.
from the court,
Yes.
an outline of the remedy. And I'm
That's
sure
right.
Judge Aiken has already been thinking ahead that if she
I-
thinks that, or if the jury, I don't know if
But
it'll be a jury.
it would be a judge trial. At
Judge
this,
trial.
It
They're
would be
gonna have a
the
jury.
most likely scenario, and that's why it would be so great if this, at least this argument gets to be heard.
Yeah.
Right. What are those things that we would like the government to at least stop doing, and some analysis of the harm that they are causing to people right now. Right. I mean, that's very clear. The concrete injury, in fact, it's the redressability. Right. What the court's the one to come up with these prescriptions, and that's what the executive branch continues to fall back on. But
And there's also a body of law that's out there called public
Yes.
trust law, which basically says the government has a responsibility
Right.
to make sure that certain things that should be part of the public's
That's right.
domain, right, should be part of the commons, right,
Right.
that government has an affirmative responsibility to protect those
Right.
things. The
Yes.
water that we
Yes.
drink, and the air that we breathe. And so
Right.
how about the atmosphere,
Right.
to make sure that the atmosphere is not, in a sense, being
Right.
polluted by carbon and other greenhouse
Yeah.
gas emissions, right? And so
Right.
does the government have a public trust obligation to
Yeah.
reduce greenhouse
Yeah,
gas
and-
emissions? And
yeah.
so there's case law
so
supporting
this is
that.
a really interesting kind of nuanced point, maybe just for you and I, Ron, but we know about the public trust doctrine and the law, and it goes all the way back to the Byzantine Empire, this notion. It's been upheld in case law for thousands of years. The government in this oral argument last week argued that it doesn't exist. It's just not, it's not even there.
The FBI,
The FBI
doesn't know what
is
it's talking about either,
wrong.
right?
The public trust doesn't exist. I've
Well, this
never
is-
heard anyone try to argue that before.
This
So
is par
that's
for
where this-
course for the Trump administration. If there's a law
That's
that
right.
they're violating and that they don't like, they just simply declare that it doesn't
That it
exist.
doesn't exist.
Right? The law saying I can't accept foreign contributions to my campaign
Yeah,
just doesn't exist.
yeah.
The FBI is wrong.
Right.
The plain print of the law,
Yeah,
you know.
but it's great because the judges actually stopped the government lawyer because the attorney on the plaintiff is ready. You see her get handed this stack, of cases that she can read off that say that this does, and they're like, just we get it, like we don't have time to do that today, kind of thing. So but that's where we're at. So stay tuned.
Right. We have a timetable. What do you think?
The judges are on their own timetable.
Yeah.
There are three people right now, like us, sitting around a table trying to craft an opinion, and it could be at least a month, I would say. I'd be surprised if we saw anything sooner than about a month, because they want to get this right, no matter what.
Right.
And they,
Right.
those words, that's what matters in those opinions for the court, and that's what will be scrutinized in every little phrase. So I think it'll
And
take
then
them at
that
least
would
a month.
only allow for a trial date
Yeah,
to be
right.
set, which
That's
is
right.
still
Need a
several
permit.
months down the road.
That's
So
right.
we're looking at a long time for this to really work its way out. And
Yep.
again, this case was filed in 2015.
Yep.
And
Wow.
here we're going to be, soon 4 years since it's been filed,
That's
and
right.
at least 5 years till we get to
That's right.
the trial.
But this war on science can really only help the plaintiff's case, right?
Yeah.
All of this should be entered. They're keeping them busy. I mean, they must be entering all of this as new evidence every time. Here's a new rule to reverse fuel economy. Here's a new rule to say that we cannot talk about the worst climate scenario, that we're only going to go to 2040. All one of those are just more evidence that the government is actively, not due to inaction, that you are actively and knowingly doing it. So they're really burying themselves, it would seem. But yeah.
To talk about crime, sometimes criminologists will talk about the fact that there has to be a morally blameworthy harm.
Right.
And to talk about something being morally blameworthy means that it's voluntary and intentional.
right.
And there's no excuse or justification for doing what you're doing.
Right.
In my book, when I'm looking at the fossil fuel industry and the government, and I'm arguing that they continue to do
That's
these
right.
bad things. They continue to subsidize the industry. Industry continue to extract
Right.
fossil fuels and market them and cause them to be burned,
Exactly.
which release more
Public
greenhouse
land.
gases. And
Right.
so at some point I have to say, you know, if they're doing this, they're doing it in a way that's morally blameworthy, the harm that is morally blameworthy, that it's voluntary and intentional. So I had to draw a line, and in my book I draw the line at 1988, over 30 years ago. The reason I drew that line was because that's when Dr. Hansen gave his famous testimony to the Senate, and there was a blaring headline in the New York Times the next day, the greenhouse effect is here. You know, we're already starting to experience it. And at that point, 30 years ago, the evidence was overwhelming that this was happening. And so in my book, I argue anything that they do after this date. Now, maybe they can claim up to this point, oh, we didn't know that what we were, that our business as usual, of course they did know. I also present a lot of evidence in the book that they did know, and they knew back in the 60s and the 70s. But after 1988, there's absolutely no way you can say we didn't know. You did know, and if you continue to engage in business as usual in the fossil fuel industry, or if you're in government and you continue to subsidize and support this industry and not take actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then you're guilty of a crime. You have engaged in a morally blameworthy harm. And now we're starting to see legal action to kick in. Public opinion is another component, obviously, to whether something is considered a crime or not. The public condemnation has continued to rise, and now the legal mechanisms are starting to kick in. So we're hopeful that the law is lagging way behind the science here, just as the public opinion lagged behind. But of course, part of that is because of the active campaign to deny climate change, which this administration continues to foster as well.
Yes.
Impeachment, a true climate criminal, impeachment on the war on science. I mean, why not?
Talk about a high crime. This is not a misdemeanor. This is a high crime and a severe felony. And again, I just want to point out that the scientific evidence, if you read David Wallace Wells' The Uninhabitable Earth, he lays it out in a very dire, straightforward way. And again, maybe you can only take doses of it at a time because it's pretty powerful stuff. Especially if you haven't been following the climate science. But we're in a heap of trouble. This is a crisis, and that becomes clearer and clearer every single day. If you value the lives of your children and your grandchildren, and if you think that we have some responsibility and obligation to future generations, we have to deal with this issue. This is a crisis, and we're not dealing with it in the way that we need to. This has to be an all-out mobilization. I mean, we need a World War II type mobilization and effort to deal with the climate crisis, and we're not doing that. And this administration is really responsible for not taking some of the actions that we should be taking, and for actively promoting making this situation even worse by talking about freedom gas and trying to bring back coal and to continue to subsidize this industry. They're only aggravating the situation.
Exactly.
You know, another issue here with regard to the climate crisis is the media coverage. It's totally inadequate. It's been inadequate from the very beginning. Somebody wrote a column recently looking at the New York Times' coverage of the flooding that took place this spring here in the Midwest. And so this lengthy article about these storms and the disruption and the climate, they never use the term climate. That's the problem. They never talk about climate change.
To what it's causing.
They never talk about causes. They never, and this is in the New York Times. Now, the Times has done some other work which does acknowledge and recognize the climate crisis. But this particular article, lengthy article looking at this major problem that's afflicted the Midwest and the farmers in our region this spring, no mention of climate change whatsoever as a possible cause. And the media has done that. Now, the nation has teamed up with some other news organizations to basically call attention to this. Look, we in the media have an obligation. We've got to do a better job of covering this issue. We've got to start focusing on this. And so I would urge people to, this was just in a more recent issue of the Nation, to really focus in on this. Now, let's bring one other issue in here that we talked about earlier that we might want to get to, and that is the issue of immigration. Because Again, this is a very important issue in our politics right now. The Trump administration seems to think that by focusing on the border, on the secure borders,
Right.
and you know, their crisis is an immigration crisis.
Right.
That's the crisis for them. So this is one way for them to engage in fear mongering and to you know, basically mount a kind of racist campaign to secure borders, build the wall, build the wall, build the wall, and rapists and murderers are coming in and all this stuff. Well, of course, there was another op-ed that appeared in the New York Times. Don, I think you had a chance to look at it.
Yeah, I did take a look at that.
And so, do you remember the main argument that this guy was
Right.
making?
He said, you know, that the United States is saying this is a terrible crisis. This is something we have to defend ourselves against. But history has consequences. And what have we done to these countries which has set up the situation where so many people are leaving? And particularly with what colonialism did, what we've done in stripping those people of their wealth, of actively intervening to put in place dictators who have supported the multinational corporations, but at the same time have gone after the indigenous people there. Guatemala is the great case with what happened after 1954 when the United States intervened to throw out a legitimately elected president and put in place I don't even know what to call him, who had killed 200,000 people after that. And then set up an economic system which had nothing to do with helping people get access to what they need for a fully human life. And so those people leave and they come to our borders. And I thought that the author made a really good parallel with the whole argument about reparations. Because if we owe reparations, and we certainly do, to African Americans for what happened with slavery, what do we owe developing countries?
Right.
Plus, the other argument, who is responsible for the climate crisis? It is the developed countries that have been the primary villains in putting all that carbon up in the atmosphere. And that's why these people are suffering so much. And we see also the indications recently where people, especially in Central America, are unable to grow crops now because of the harm that's been done to the crisis. So we have no responsibility toward them in this whole issue? No, we have a great responsibility here.
The headline on that op-ed was, "Why should immigrants respect our borders? The West never respected theirs."
Exactly.
So again, there is this history of colonialism, this history of imperialism, this history of imposing neoliberal economic policies which benefit corporations and the wealthy, but destroy the working people in those societies.
That's right.
And so right off the bat, you set up an economic system that is going to cause people to have to leave. They can't survive there because of the economic policies, and so they are going to migrate north. Now add on to that, again, the climate crisis, right? There's a huge drought going on right now in Central America, which makes it even more difficult, if not impossible. And so, again, why are all these people coming toward the U.S. border? I mean, Trump exaggerates how many people are actually coming. But why are people motivated to pick up and leave? People don't just leave their home for no good reason. They're driven out by the economic conditions. They're driven out by drought and climate change. And so we have some responsibility here, right? So I think the whole border issue, the whole immigration debate has to be challenged, right?
Yes.
It's all like, keep these people out, protect our borders. But yeah, what responsibility do we have to these people? There is a moral responsibility here, and we're shirking it.
Also about the drugs. I mean, where are the drugs being used? How much is that is being used in the United States? And because we're counting on those cartels in those countries to feed our drug habit here in this country. And so those people face the violence and all that goes with that. We have a lot of responsibility here, a lot of responsibility. And to me, the outrageous way that they are treating people who are clearly not terrorists
Right.
coming to our border. When you see the pictures of the women and children and the conditions under which they're keeping these people, it's just a violation of everything we say we believe as a nation. It's just a terrible stain on our whole dignity and respect.
And the author, Suketo Mehta, is the author. This was in the June 7th issue of the New York Times. He also points out that, in fact, immigration has very important positive benefits.
Exactly.
They don't commit more crime. They're not rapists and murderers. That's totally false. Their crime rates are much lower. And they provide enormous economic benefits to our society.
Yeah.
So there are lots of positive things about having
That's right.
many of these people come into our country and make contributions.
Many economists point out that the Social Security system is in danger now because we don't have enough workers. The ratio of people that are actually working toward the people that are taking Social Security now is really coming down tremendously. So we need more workers here.
Yeah.
So they could make a very positive contribution if we would let them.
Agreed.
Denise, we only have a few minutes left, but we got to talk about the Democratic Party.
Well, hopefully this will
both
come
these
up in the
issues.
debates is what I'm thinking this whole time is right. So we know Perez and the DNC has decided to not hold a special climate change debate.
You can't have a single issue
Right.
Can't have a
debate,
single issue debate.
a pet issue.
So, but, we're not telling the story. I think this does go back to what you're talking about. The Nation, The Guardian, others are trying to tell these kinds of stories in different ways. And boy, if I don't hear a story like Don just said about the real immigration crisis and why it's happening and what our responsibility is from the folks that get to be on that stage, I'm going to be pretty upset by that, right? So. With the Democratic Party. So I like to call it 23andMe now, just like the DNA testing, because there are 23 candidates. Only 20 are going to make the stage, right? With the debates coming up over 2 nights. We don't know a lot about that. I think that there's been a lot of critiques on the number of folks getting in the race. And one of the best ones that I've heard is, why don't some of you folks run for the Senate?
Right.
There's 3 seats away in the Senate, and everybody's putting their hat into the presidential ring. And I have to say, I think that's a pretty smart critique by some of the pundits out there to say, why not focus on Arizona, Colorado, Maine? There are some winnable Senate seats that could also take us a lot
Mitch
further.
McConnell is a ruthless power broker.
Yeah.
You'll never shame him into doing the right thing.
Never.
The only thing you can do is take away his power.
Agreed.
Yeah.
The Democrats have to take back the Senate if there's going to be any significant changes.
Yeah.
And so yes, why don't some of these candidates pour their resources and their abilities into helping to swing the Senate back to the Democrats? This is Gene Robinson in the Washington Post made an excellent point of this the other day. But the Democratic Party is just not stepping up.
Nope.
They're not stepping up to the plate on the climate issue. They're not stepping up to the plate on the impeachment issue.
Correct.
Right.
And
In immigration.
they're not stepping up to the plate on the immigration issue. There's a war going on, I think, within the Democratic Party. We have sort of the neoliberal progressives, if you will, within the Democratic Party, the corporate Democrats, the mainstream Democrats, and then you have the populist progressives who are coming in and trying to swing the party, the Bernie Sanders, the Elizabeth Warrens.
That's right.
And so there's kind of a war going on right now within the Democratic Party. And that's a really important, there's some important issues that need to be addressed and debated within that party.
That's right.
And if that's not resolved in a certain way, it might open the door for Trump to come back in and win a second term.
That's right.
That's
And
right.
I think the politics is certainly at play here, and maybe early on, in the early days of the Trump administration, the smart political play was to maybe not add fuel to that fire, and So some of the arguments against calling out immigration, climate, and impeachment are that that will empower the Republican base and add fuel and help Donald Trump continue to get elected. I don't actually think that political argument is really true anymore, right? We've seen the
No.
same numbers for Trump no matter what happens.
Right.
And so there is this groundswell within the Democratic Party to say, you know what, we should just go ahead and try to
Yeah,
impeach anyways,
right.
win anyways. I don't think Mitch McConnell's over there worrying about what the Democrats are going to do, right? Because we're not having these sort of aggressive ways about playing this game because we're afraid that those politics don't work in our favor. I think no matter what we do, those people are going to, some people are going to vote for Trump.
That's right.
We've seen that, right?
You
So why
could shoot
at this
somebody
point?
on Fifth Avenue, as you said.
Exactly.
And,
So
they
exactly.
would still vote for
At
him.
this point, I think there is a arc, you know, even my good colleague here of saying, you know, why not go for it then and try to win on the actual issues and things that you can fight for.
That's right.
Rather than against. And gosh, I hope we see that in the debates coming up. There are some really good candidates.
There are.
And I am excited to hear them discuss this.
And it would have been nice to have a debate on the climate crisis. And
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
not a single issue. I mean, Tom Perez is absolutely wrong here. It's not a single issue.
Yeah.
It's not a pet issue. It is the central issue of our time, and it involves so many of the other issues that we can
Economic
talk
issues,
about.
the
And the
Green New
immigration,
Deal, about
the-
employment, and so
Right.
much else beside the climate, just the whole environmental
Right.
situation, which is so endangered by what's going on. Yeah, right. There's so many facets to that. We didn't have any trouble talking for an hour on this, so I don't see how they would have.
Exactly. And again, I think the Green New Deal proposal is another illustrative point here. Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to deal with it, right? She's
Right.
downplayed it, she's
Right.
poo-pooed it, and you know, again, she's
Right.
fearful that if
Yes.
they go for the Green New Deal resolution, just as she's fearful if they go for impeachment, it's going to upset the apple cart
That's
and
right.
it's going to, you know, affect the 2020 election. I think there's a lot more evidence to suggest if you go strongly, have that climate debate, support the Green New Deal, put impeachment on the table, those are the winning issues.
That's
Right.
right.
That,
Right.
I mean, all the evidence that we have from polling shows that
That's
those
right.
progressive positions have enormous support
That's
Yeah.
right.
among the
Yeah.
public, and
That's
that
right.
that would be you know, how did the Democrats win in 2018? How did they take back the House?
That's
By
right.
running on some of those issues. Healthcare was the issue
That's
for that
exactly right.
election. But I think there's some other winning issues in here, and yet Pelosi and the mainstream Democrats, the corporate Democrats,
Right.
want to shy away from that and not really address it. So.
Right,
Right.
right.
So, you know what, if it sets up a target, I think that we could win that target at this point.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
really do.
think
And
so,
I wish we
think so.
would go for it.
Well, we're just about out of time for today. One of the issues that we had talked about maybe getting into today was the situation in Iran, and we're just not going to have time to do that today. But we did do a show a year ago in May on when the Trump administration withdrew from the agreement, the agreement on the nuclear weapons deal.
Yeah.
So if people want to go back and look at that program, but I think probably next time we will focus on what's happening
Yeah.
because the Trump administration keeps threatening to engage in a war with Iran, which would be a catastrophic disaster.
Wow.
So we'll hopefully come back and focus on that. So there's never any lack of critical issues to talk about and offer alternative perspectives. So thanks to Denise, thanks to Don, thanks to you for joining us, thanks to our great crew behind the scenes. Please come back and see us again on Critical Issues, Alternative Views.